Welcome, my fellow wannabes. Welcome to the show. I am your host, Gabriel Fast, and joining me today I have a very special guest. The most legit thing that could ever happen on the Wannabe Critic. We have an established author that we're talking to today, or that I'm talking to today. Ryan Dalton is joining me via Zoom chat. How are you feeling today, man?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing really good. I want to thank you so much for taking time to have a little chat with me. We've been talking about doing this forever,
I know.
So, and it was one of those things of I was going down to your area quite a bit, and we wanted to try and make it happen in person, but, just things get busy and all that stuff. So I'm glad we were able to make this happen today.
Pandemics happen and people stop leaving their homes.
Yeah, exactly. So you've pretty much just walked out, like you pretty much just gone out for necessities, like you pretty much just stayed at home.
Groceries and chiropractor appointments, that's pretty much it. And it's tough because I don't like writing at home. I haven't done it in forever, and it's too familiar. I need the energy being out, and so it's been an interesting mental shift getting to where I'm productive again.
So you don't write at home, you write at other places like Starbucks or what? Where?
Sometimes it's coffee shops. There's a place here in town they call them co-working spaces. So it's essentially like it gives you all the amenities and stuff of an office, but it doesn't feel like an office. You're not sitting in a cubicle.
Right.
It's sort of half office, half coffee shop a little bit.
So you feel like a little less encumbered, kind of like.
Yeah. So it's, there's open spaces, there's energy there. It's very comfortable to work in. And then it's, at the same time, it's a little quieter than a coffee shop, which helps. And so I go there the majority of the time, but sometimes I'm feeling like a Starbucks or there's a local shop here called Picasso's that I really like. But yeah, I just like, it's like you get the creative energy flowing more when I'm not in the house.
Right. Yeah, I have a friend who does videography for a living, right? And he met me and my wife one time for lunch, and he showed up to and he works pretty much from home, but he'll kind of get out of the house every once in a while, But he showed up to meet us for lunch, and he was like dressed up in like, formal attire. And we're like, what's going on? And he's like, well, I feel like I'm going to work whenever I dress up, because you can finally, you can kind of have a hard time distinguishing what's work and what's not work, if you're working from home. So that kind of sounds like, in a way, like kind of like a preemptive strike on your end. Like you kind of have a little bit of comfort, but it also feels like you're going to do a job. It takes effort to get to that place and do stuff. I mean,
yeah, and it's a mental shift, and there's something about like the energy of not knowing like who's going to come around or not, just having people do things, and
right.
that I liked. Like when I was living in Phoenix, there were my favorite coffee shop was comfortable for that, but it was also in an area of town where ASU was, so there was a kind of like a college-y feel, and like the energy of all that, where people are like running around learning and doing stuff was really nice too. So you kind of feed off that.
Yeah, kind of like a hungry, like yearning feeling, like I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna take the world and all this stuff. I living in Fayetteville in the past, like everyone's like that, So I can definitely vibe with that. But I like coffee shops. I like to go and edit footage at coffee shops, or whatever, and just with those. You get a good set of headphones, and like you're still around people a little bit, and like you get some good tunes going, and there's just nothing like it at all.
Exactly.
So
yeah, I agree. So I've been the closest I'm able to get right now is I actually will set up a table out on my front porch. I live in a neighborhood where a lot of people walk around, so not only has it been fairly nice weather, so it's been nice to do that, but people will walk by, and it's as much as I can approximate a coffee shop right now.
Yeah, well, there you go. Make your home brew, your cold brew. There you go.
Exactly.
So, well, ladies and gentlemen, if you didn't know, this is the Wannabe Critic. This is your weekly stop for diversity. We do everything from comic reviews to movie reviews to video game reviews to interviews and just all kinds of other random stuff. In our constant efforts and attempts to make quality content, we have branched off into several other podcast feeds. Game Club, where we talk video games all the time. Storytime, which is a Star Wars-driven narrative produced in-house. And then also A Guy and His Wife, where me and my beautiful wife, we also do the same things that I mentioned before in true wannabe geeked out fashion. But Ryan, we're not here to talk about all that crap. We're here to talk about you, man. So, just kind of like a little history lesson. So, my friend Ryan here, he is an established author. The author of the you have the wait, I got this. I had it written down, but I'm trying not to look at my notes.
I'm
I
gonna
know
have
the
a
names.
diva moment and walk out. You don't know my
Yeah,
books. No,
exactly.
I'm
No
with you.
kidding. The Time Shift trilogy.
There you go.
So we have the Year of Lightning, the Black Tempest, and the Genesis Flame. Did I get all that correct?
You got it. Very nice.
I got it. So
The first one is behind my head right here.
yeah, and I saw that as I was observing your space. You got a nice little space there, but I can't actually make anything out. But I remember,
Yeah.
yeah, I remember it was like, the covers of the books, lightning, fire, and it looked like
Ice.
Oh, it's ice. Okay, there you go. Nice.
Ice inspired anyway. So yeah, they're time travel mysteries, but I also had an elemental theme in each book that sort of played into the plot as well, which is what informed the covers.
Very nice. Yeah, and it is cool art. It definitely stands out. And I didn't want to kind of go into this episode and kind of regurgitate a lot of the information that I've already read in your other interviews. So we're trying to come at this with as an authentic angle as possible. And obviously I think inherently you're going to riff off a little bit of the core information. So I'm going to catch everyone up to speed a little bit. So you pretty much start writing since you're about 8 years old.
Pretty much.
And whenever you're 10, you're writing stories since 8, and then whenever you're 10, you have a family friend who gets his book in published pretty much. And you kind of get a sense of this thing of like, oh, I can do this. Like, and that's kind of where the dream starts. Is that pretty much right?
Yeah, he self-published a book, which was a lot harder back when he did it. There weren't nearly as many resources, but it was at that point that I had loved books ever since I'd learned to read. I had written stories and poetry and things, but never saw it as anything like a real person could do. And then he does that, and it's suddenly like this whole world opens up to me that I'm like, wait a minute, an actual just real normal person can do this,
right?
And that changed my whole outlook.
Right, but it doesn't come just without there's a really famous quote that I really love to use. It's from Rocky 2, I believe, or Rocky 3. It says you can wish in one hand and crap in the other and see what fills up first. And I would assume that you had to go through a lot of crap to get these books published. The thing of it is you had 2 years to write. It took you 2 years to write the book, and then it took you 2 years to sell the book. Not even your first book, but the first book that got published. Is that correct? So you'd actually had other books that you had written that did not sell. Is that correct?
Well, I had lots of other things that I had written. There was a point where, kind of through my teen years and early to mid 20s, I was still writing. But even after kind of having that revelation at 10 with my friend, I still never looked at it as a profession. I just thought, oh, this is something I could do. But it was just kind of a side thing. I've gone to this, I think, in one or two other interviews, but I was also, especially going into my 20s, dealing with some health issues that were kind of making, I was a zombie through half of my 20s because I had really, really terrible undiagnosed sleep apnea. So I essentially was just kind of I had no energy to do anything besides just get everything I needed done, and then I'd collapse. And then in my late 20s, I finally got into doctors. I got surgery, I got treatment and things, and it changed my whole life. And less than a year after that surgery, I started writing my first book. Now, up until that point, I had been practicing with lots of other things because I knew it was something that I wanted to start taking seriously. So I wrote anything I could. I mean, I would enter screenplay competitions. I wrote short stories for like online anthologies. I wrote for a comedy blog for a couple of years, just on and off. I would even tell people, hey, if you want to sell something like on Craigslist, let me write your ad, because I could play around and make crazy ads and make people laugh. And I would always end up selling everything. And writing one of those actually led me to some freelance advertising work for an ad agency in Arizona. because I ended up selling them something on Craigslist, and they were like, "Do you do this professionally? Because you should." So I worked for them, and that was all in preparation because I knew I wanted books to be my end game, but I also knew I needed more practice.
Right.
And then finally, where I got to the point when I said, "Okay, I feel like my knowledge and my skills are to the point where I can take a crack at this." That's when I started writing The Year of Lightning.
Okay. So your first real legit book then ended up getting published.
It did, yeah.
Which you have told me, and there's the conversations off mic, that a lot of times, 9 times out of 10, if you're wanting to become an author, your first book is likely not to sell.
It's very rare, but a lot of times it's because the people who are writing books, they learn to write books by writing books.
Gotcha.
I learned to write by writing everything else.
Everything you could.
So I had written like the equivalent, like content-wise, the equivalent of novels. I just hadn't written a novel yet.
Right.
But I had been such a student of like story, and I loved structure and storytelling so much that I was learning ever since I was a kid.
Right. And I think anyone who loves good story, and see, this is the crazy thing, is there's only a handful of books. Like I have a very much millennial attention span, and I'm a dude, and I have a hard time staying focused whenever it comes to reading. But ever so often, a good book will actually hook me, and it's actually kind of funny. The last novel I actually read was actually nonfiction, which is kind of crazy. But do you find that a lot of inspiration kind of like inherently comes from watching a lot of TV, watching a lot of movies, playing a lot of video games? I mean, what are some of like your biggest influences in going into trying to write as you have put it, a science fantasy novel?
Well, my ideas, they tend to come from, I mean, it's hard to track where they all come from because I tend to be an observer. I just sit back a lot and watch things and listen and think, and it all kind of just goes into a giant wheel here and spins around, and then the ideas that spit out, I just try to catch them. Well, like for The Year of Lightning, my inspiration was I got a picture of that popped in my head of an abandoned house with no doors, and then I pictured seeing somebody in the window of the house, and I was like, man, what? That got me asking questions like how they get in there, what are they doing there, and things, and everything else that happened branched out from that one image in my head. I've been told that my style is very cinematic, and I definitely think that that's true. Kind of like you, I grew up on movies and like new media and things, and so I tend to think of things in scenes and soundtracks, and
Yeah.
the motion that film gives you, and even thinking of like perspective and camera placement and
Right.
things, and I end up just kind of instinctively writing that into my narration. So I definitely will get inspiration from maybe how a scene makes me feel, or if I hear a certain song and I think, man, that really nails the rhythm that I want for this scene. So soundtracks are very important to me. So yeah, it all comes from, it's like you absorb everything and then you squeeze the sponge and you see what comes out.
What comes out of it. Yeah, I totally get that. That makes a lot of sense, because I think, and you're describing what a lot of people, because I've definitely, I think everyone, and this is another question I was going to ask you, I think everyone kind of dabbles in storytelling at one point or another, trying to try their hand at short stories, or even say, I'm going to write a novel and all this stuff. And ever since I was 16, 17, I'd always, been interested in storytelling, and have, it seems like I'll work on an idea for like a few weeks at a time, and then it like just drains me, mentally. And then I put it away for God knows how long. And then I get it back out with, as you've put it in other interviews, fresh new eyes, and kind of read it over and be like, oh, this is cool, like I want to refine this here, and then work on it for a month or whatever and put it back, and that's just, I'm just not as devout. It's just something I enjoy doing. I think it's good to flex that creative, those creative muscles you have. I think it's good to flex in different ways, in any way you can. Do you have people come up to you all the time and be like, oh, I have this story idea, or I have this idea for a book? I mean, how often does that happen to you whenever people find out you're an author?
Some of the time. I think it happens to other people more. I don't know if I don't seem approachable or what, but but yeah, some people will say that. I do get a lot of people saying I would love to write a book someday, and things like that, and I do occasionally get people saying, hey, I tried to write this thing. Would you look at it and tell me what you think? That's the only thing that I will almost always say no to. If unless it's a professional or someone trying to be a professional writer.
Excuse me.
Because otherwise my feedback's always going to end up being the same.
Which is this sucks.
No, it's you need a lot more practice. You need a lot more skill. Here is the roadmap map I would give you if you want to get there. And inevitably, 99% of the people halfway through my description want to stop talking about it. So
yeah. When I think I even, let you read something that I had, was kind of working on, just like very bare bones. Not very much. You told me like, hey, like I like where you're going with this, but just keep at it, pretty much. And I feel like whenever it's something as stories come from a very personal place, I feel like, and I feel like if you can't take criticism, then you probably will never be able to be any sort of creator, because it takes that to make you better. And people just want to be told, like, people are going to give something to you as a professional and be like, oh, I hope this, in their mind, they're probably thinking, oh, he's going to love this. I think he's going to really like this. And then whenever you actually spit truth at them, then it's like, oh, well, I wanted you to tell me that I was awesome, not that I needed to work on stuff. And, I mean, does that sound kind of accurate to like what you've experienced as getting, those
sometimes,
things?
Yeah, some people will like you, and I had no problem looking at your stuff because I knew you were trying to get better. And that's where I'm more than happy to look at something and offer feedback. If it's someone that is basically just, and I learned the lesson the hard way, not a close friend, but just kind of a friend of a friend, said, hey, I wrote this thing, I would love to get it published. Sorry to laugh.
It's okay.
And you said, can you look at it? And I was like, okay, yeah. So I looked at it, and when you do this enough, you can sometimes look at the first paragraph of something and know everything that you would give as feedback for the entire rest of the book. Because you just, it's like a filmmaker could look at a movie and see all the things behind the scenes and like know all the elements that went into it. I could read the first page of a novel and tell you if it's ready to be published or not. It's just
because
there's some taste does factor into it some, but only if you're at a publishable level.
Right.
Up until that point. And with him, I said, look, if you're writing this as a hobby and your wife enjoyed it, which is great. If that's all you're going for, great, keep on writing. If you're looking to get it published, it's nowhere near ready.
Yeah.
For this reason and that reason, and I never heard back from him, so I don't think he appreciated that. But so, and that's one reason. Just like the farther you go through this, the less you're probably going to say, yeah, to anyone, yeah, go ahead and send me what you have, because the feedback's going to end up being the same.
Right. Yeah. And I think, this kind of goes into the overarching question of, kind of where we're getting into your story and stuff is, it took you 2 years to write this, 2 years of, devout, refinement and things like that. And you're also trying to work a job at this point as well. So you're working and you're writing and you get it finished and you're like, great, this is done. Then it takes you 2 whole years to sell it. While it's a finished work, did you begin working on the second book at that point? Did you even know there's going to be a sequel? So you're basically still working your day job, and then you're like, okay, well, now I'm going to keep pursuing the agent and see if the agent can get this thing to sell for me. And that whole process takes 2 years?
Yeah. So I knew going in that plan A was I would like to get an agent with it. Plan B was I knew that there were some smaller publishing houses that were still reputable that would work with authors without an agent. So I thought, okay, if it doesn't work out with an agent, I'll look into some of these smaller houses that seem like they're still doing good work. So yeah, and querying, what they call it, the querying process, is a slow, painful process that will definitely test your resolve and your desire to publish. I didn't start working on the second one. I was just noodling around with some other ideas and things. Typically, I recommend any working author will tell you not to write the second book until you've already sold the first one, because if you don't end up selling the first one, you wasted all that time on book number 2 when you could have been working on something else.
Yeah.
So yeah, while I was waiting, it takes tons of research and constant work to to keep that query process going. So I was staying pretty occupied those 2 years, and I was even still doing revisions, and I was doing other things to try to just to insert myself into the writing community online and things, and so that was taking work as well.
Gotcha. So you're in all that time trying to get it sold. You're doing a lot of busy work, making sure you're kind of keeping the tool sharp, so to speak.
Yeah, and then even I was getting some initial. You always get rejections, but some initial rejections I was getting had some common threads to the reasons, and so I was trying to figure that out. There's another writer that actually helped me make one change that I think is what ended up getting the book sold, because I was essentially starting the book in the wrong place, and we found another chapter that she said, and as soon as I saw what she meant, I agreed. This chapter is your real first chapter. So
Kind of like the
rearranged some things, yeah,
right.
did a new draft, and within a few months it sold after that.
Well, there you go. So it just goes to show when you take the criticism to heart from a professional, they're not going to tell you crap, and I think that's with anything. And this is going to be story time for you really fast. You're really passionate about something whenever you start dreaming about it. So the other night I have this dream that I get Joe Rogan on the podcast. And, which is like, he's the biggest podcaster of all time pretty much at this point. And, he's giving me this criticism, and I woke up and I was like, dang it, I wish I could remember what he said because it was probably really good, And I think that kind of goes into what you're saying of just learning how to take the criticism, and whatever that change was that did ended up getting it made. You're like, oh, I'm glad I listened, and you didn't stick
Absolutely.
to your prideful, because I think there's a certain amount of, I guess, moxie or pride, or something that goes into all creators, or a certain sense of vanity, right? Where you are trying to imprint yourself onto your work, and you don't want to be told that, in a sense, that you are wrong. So being able to, what do you think of that?
Yeah, each writer comes at it a little bit differently. It does take a certain level of confidence to say I'm good enough to write books on a professional level, for sure. You'll find all levels of confidence in writers. I have never really, like, some people struggle with like really heavy imposter syndrome, where they love doing it, but they think that even if they're successful, they think, oh, at some point someone's going to realize I'm really no good, and that's when all this will stop. I've never really struggled with self-confidence. I feel like I'm a good writer. At the same time, I'm always trying to learn. So you got to balance the two, and you just have to have enough perspective on your own work to know that it doesn't matter how good you are. No book makes it to shelves without criticism, without changes, without edits, without dozens of eyes on them, offering different things. And you have to learn taking what criticism to take and say, okay, that's definitely valid, and I'm going to use it, and I think that's going to make it better. And what criticism you don't agree with, and you can just chalk up to, well, maybe that's personal taste, or it doesn't feel right for my book. That
Right.
just comes with practice, learning your craft, and learning who you are and what your voice is as a writer.
Right. And that kind of, yeah, you're kind of talking about, like, for instance, if someone hates pop music, but you love pop music and you're writing a pop album and they say, well, that your album sucks, or that this,
Yeah.
you might want to change this. And you're like, well, okay. You just take it with a grain of salt and be like, well, he doesn't like pop music, whatever.
Yeah. Well, like young adult books will often get reviews that are like, this book reads like it was written for teenagers. Well, it was written for teenagers. So if you don't want a book that was written for teenagers, go read an adult book.
Yeah. Right. So that's perfect. I love that. So you moved to the Midwest at the end of 2017 from Arizona, right?
Yes.
And it takes you, as you said before, it takes you 2 years to sell 2 years to write the book, 2 years to sell the book. At the end of that process, you're like, yeah, I'm getting, I know I'm going to be getting my royalty check or whatever it is. At what point does the thought ever cross your mind of, I've made it, like I've got it, or this is something I'm going to do for the rest of my life, and this is my job? Like, do you get that confirmation or that affirmation that you are an author at that point?
I called myself a writer for years. All those years I was writing, I started calling myself an author after I sold the first book, because I felt like, and that's not a standard that I enforce on anyone else. That was just for me what I felt comfortable doing. So yeah, the first book came out in 2016, and yeah, starting in 2018, I moved out to the Midwest. I was ready to leave the corporate job and focus more on this. And I knew at that point that, man, I don't think unless you're Stephen King or someone like that, I don't know if you could ever say I have made it, but uh,
Yeah,
but you can say, okay, I am now in the game.
you're established.
I'm now in the professional arena.
Right.
And so it was at that point when the books were out there and things, and I knew I had ideas flowing. I knew at that point, even if I had never another idea, I had enough ideas to last me for years. But they always keep coming. The more I write, the more ideas I get.
You just have probably like a bank of ideas that you're like, you might go back to every once in a while. Once you're finished with a project, you might be like, okay, now what's next? What am I working on next? Like, do you find yourself in that process?
I'm always thinking ahead. Yeah. I mean, like right now, I'm finishing up first edits on a new book that's going to be going out with my agency soon. I'm waiting on final edits for the next book that's going to be published, and I am in just initial concept and outlining work for the next book I'm going to write after all that. Plus, I'm just always getting ideas. So if I have something, I give myself permission to stop for a little bit, write down the idea, noodle with it a little bit, and then I leave it. I leave it in the file, and then I get back to the day's work.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and I like how you're very self-aware of, because I feel like it'd be really easy for an author or someone who is a writer and they get something published and be like, all right, well, I'm going to be the next Stephen King, or I'm going to be the next James Patterson. And, I listen to a lot of interviews and I listen to a lot of, writers talk about their work. And it's like, and I feel like this is with anyone who gets big in anything. If you do make it, there is kind of like a prideful sense of trying to answer questions and things like that. But I appreciate you because you're like, yeah, I mean, I did it. Like, I did something that a lot of people are never going to be able to do or experience. And I'm in the game. Like, that's just the fact of the matter, varying degrees. And I think about it in terms of YouTube. I trying to become a YouTuber or make money doing YouTube. I don't know if quote unquote YouTuber is the right thing, but, I think that there's people out there, they're like, oh, well, to ever make any money, you have to have hundreds of thousands of subscribers. And it's like, well, yeah, that definitely helps, but that's not really the case. You can have 10,000 subscribers and make good money, doing YouTube. I mean, that's a couple of bills being paid,
Sure.
So I think keeping things in perspective and keeping things like being self-aware, as I said before, that seems like something you're pretty good at. And it's like, I'm confident in my writing. I know I can do it. Let's just see what happens type thing. And I appreciate that mindset.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I try to stay grounded and just stay real about it all, and like not be too like I don't like people who get pretentious or uppity about
Yeah.
it, and it's just a thing I love to do, and I'm trying my best to do it, and it is. I feel like it's dangerous if you stop feeling gratitude for the point you're at, because I mean, yeah, and so I feel very fortunate to have, so for one thing, to have sold that first book, which led to selling the whole trilogy, which is also rare for a first time author, and then to go on, and it's a very small percentage that makes a second sale, and I was able to do that. I have an agent now that I got with that book that I wrote, and so every time when I'm hitting more roadblocks and trying to accomplish things that are difficult, because the goal always keeps moving, I
Right.
try to look back and think, man, this many years ago, I was just begging to be at the point that I am now. So I try to
Right.
stop and like just have perspective of, what, yeah, I'm always trying for the next thing, but I really love being where I am as well.
Well, and it really shows that it's not all about the money for you, or like, really, like, it's not really all about, like, you really enjoy the craft, because even with the legible scrawl stuff, how to prove a villain and,
Hmm.
working with them, I mean, that no one's heard of that. You know what I mean? Like, I've told all my friends about it, but, just knowing that I have a friend who it's like, yeah, he's like he's an author, like that's what he does, but he helped write this and refine this with this group of people. And I don't know what they paid you, or if they paid you at all, or if you were just like, happy to help or whatever.
It was just for fun. That one
Yeah.
was just a project that was like, this is too cool for me not to be involved in.
Yeah, totally. And that speaks volumes whenever they're making money doing something, but it's like, oh yeah, heck yeah, I do want to help out with this thing. So that's cool. Do you feel like the move to the Midwest kind of helped with the clarification, or maybe like realization of what the Time Shift trilogy would actually become? Do you think that definitely had an impact on the storytelling aspect of things? I mean, are the areas
Well,
much different?
By the time I had moved to the Midwest, the series was done. The last one hadn't come out yet, but everything was written in the can. Um, so I was already, at least storytelling wise, moving on to I was already writing something else. But I grew up. I mean, yeah, I lived in Arizona for 10 years, but I grew up in Tennessee
Okay.
before I made that move. So, um, and I had family in Missouri, where I am now. So I would visit there often during my childhood. So I felt like I had a fairly good grasp on like what the Midwest looks like and feels like, and all of that. And I felt like it was the right setting for that story that I wanted to tell.
Right, yeah, and for all those who are listening, the Time Shift trilogy does take place in a fictional Midwestern town. So, do you find, obviously you have to get analytics and things like that from where the book is selling and how well it's selling and things like that. Do you find that there's a lot of people from this area that are actually reading and consuming this book, or do you find that it's more people spread out across like both coasts that are more interested in the Midwestern area that's selling?
I think it's spread around. I don't know if there's any like regional hotspots. I mean, it definitely helped. It definitely had some traction in the Midwest where I was because I was there, so I could
Right.
go and do events and see people and talk to people. And um, but yeah, I don't know if I spotted any like easily discernible trends that way. Um, I think the only time that really like trends like that will really present themselves at any kind of volume is if you're talking international sales, and this is something that I've only learned within the last couple of years. Because um, if you're wanting to, like, let's say you sell a book to a publisher here, but you also want to sell some international rights, depending on the book, it doesn't always count, but depending on the book, they say it can give it stronger sales. Like if you have it set in a major American city, New York, LA, or something like that,
Gotcha.
because those are the places that someone not in the U.S.
Knows about.
is
Right.
going to recognize from America.
Because they
Like
see
I
it
said,
getting
that's
destroyed. They see it getting
right.
destroyed in all the blockbuster movies. They're like, oh
Yeah,
yeah, New York's
exactly.
getting destroyed again.
Yeah, and if you've never been to America, you probably think that like LA is here and New York is here,
Yeah.
and but so and even that is not like the case with every book. It's not that a book that's not set there can't sell internationally, but that's where you can definitely see some trends of what people are interested in regionally.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Well, that was just something I had thought of that I thought was, I was curious about asking. So, kind of coming out of the dystopian future trend of, the Hunger Games and the Maze Runner and, all these other teen drama, young adult books out of the early 2010s. How do you start with an idea and say, okay, I've seen this done before. How do you differentiate and make a different spin on something that is obviously going to appeal to that same audience?
Well, tone and theme have a big impact. Tone, especially. Um, I I don't read a lot of dystopians. My books are definitely not dystopian. But I realized they were coming out at a point where that was definitely still on the rise and kind of in demand. But publishing is cyclical, and where it's rising, it's gonna fall, and as that's falling, something else is rising. Um, but uh, I knew that tonally, I tend to, while I don't mind reading dystopian, some of them, I knew that tonally that's never what I like to write. I like to write something that even if there's dark times and dark things and challenges and there's things that go wrong and go bad, I always want a bright core to it and a tone of hope, and not something that feels bleak. I mean, it can feel bleak in scenes, like at low points during the
Right.
story. Um, but I have read some books and even watched some movies that have been these just depressing dystopian worlds, and then maybe the good guys win in the end, but I think, okay, but you still live in that world that's just the worst.
Yeah.
So is it really a happy ending?
Yeah.
Not that you need 100% happy ending, of course, but
Right.
um, uh, it's easier for me to read those things than it is to write, because if I write it, I got to live in it in my head for months or years.
And you have to get
And
to
I'm
know
just
those characters and
Yeah,
yeah.
and I'm just not a fan of that. And it may seem to to be opposed to what I've done with the last book, because this book that is going to be coming out is, I mean, it has Alzheimer's as a central theme, um, which can be very, very depressing. But even writing that, I wanted an undertone of hope, I think. So that I would say that's probably, if I have a brand, that's part of it.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, that's another thing of being self-aware. Makes sense. And what you're saying, it kind of reminds me of Star Wars. I remember Dave Filoni, I think, or even uh, shoot, what's his name? The guy, John Favreau. He's like, you're talking about Star Wars and talking about the Mandalorian and stuff. He's like, you want to have a certain bleakness, but have an undertelling of hope, because that is
Hmm.
universally a good story. If you have that, like, especially in a movie or TV, like if you, or even, I think within books too, like there can be just okay characters, and if the overarching story is like, okay, well, maybe something good is going to come out of this in the end, then you're always kind of eager to turn the page or eager to watch the next episode and stuff like that. So it sounds like you've kind of found your formula, with these three books as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, and it always came back to the two main characters, the twins, that I wanted to have a core of goodness, even if they struggled at times with, moral decisions or things, and always wanting to do the right thing.
Yeah, well, that's wholesome. I mean, that's how much more wholesome can you get than that? You kind of talked about. I had this written down. I said, do you find yourself playing scenes from movies or games or TV in your head as you're writing? You kind of talked about, you definitely see, the movement and the camera angles, how things are going to be set up, the cinematic storytelling. How do you, whenever you spend most of your time writing, how do you tell yourself, or when do you tell, like, what's the process of, okay, I've been writing X amount of time, I need to give myself this amount of time off? I mean, do you take time off? Like, how does that whole process work?
Sure, yeah. Well, for one thing, I don't write every day. Um, some people do, and it totally works for them. I end up writing, I think, probably about 4 days a week. Um, and so that break helps, gives my brain a little bit of space. I have other hobbies that I like. I cook. I'll go read things that are way different than I normally write. I'm a big music fan, so I'm always looking for good music. And in normal times, I'll go out and do things.
Yeah.
So that gives my brain headspace, even at a time when I'm like really buckled down on a project. Um, when I finish, like let's say when I finish the first draft of a book, I'll give it usually 2 to 4 weeks, where I don't look at it and just let my brain get distance from it. And in that time, I'll usually take a week or two of that and just kind of be mentally lazy. I won't work on anything else.
Yeah.
I'll play a video game, or I'll just catch up on shows or something, and just kind
Live
of
it.
go
Yeah.
neutral a little
Yeah.
bit.
Right.
Um, and then yeah, when I'm ready to tackle the second draft, that's when I'll pull it back out. Even when there are times after, let's say I hit a milestone of a fairly important part of a story, or like maybe there was a heavy part that I'd been dreading getting through, and I finally get through it. I'll give myself permission to take a couple days off after that, to just breathe. Because you start, when you do it long enough, you recognize if there's a day where, okay, I could sit in front of the computer, but I wouldn't end up putting out anything good that I'm going to keep anyway. So I might as well take the day off.
Yeah.
And that's one of the beauties of writing and working for yourself.
Yeah. You can do whatever you
uh,
want.
Now there are points where if you're on a strict deadline, which I've had before as well, where I didn't want to come back and say, hey, I'm not ready yet. That it's like it didn't matter what mood I was in or what I was feeling. I was going to sit down and write, and you can make that work too. It's just not
Yeah.
something I want to do every time.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there is a crunch time, like a time and place for everything, right? And eventually, I feel like you could even potentially maybe channel some of that into, uh, maybe that underlying frustration, channel that into actually getting things done. I know for myself, like whenever I'm frustrated about something, that's the night where I'll stay up and record like 3 reviews of something, and
Mhm.
edit it all like right then. And then like whenever it's time to go to sleep, like I really feel like I accomplished something, and I took that frustration and kind of channeled it into productivity. Do you,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Or if I'm going to write a scene and I know it's upcoming and it's a scene that kind of scares me, I will insert that fear or whatever that feeling is into the scene. And that's kind of therapeutic, but it also helps me kind of face my own discomfort while at the same time being productive.
Yeah, makes sense. It's kind of crazy how like the human psyche can play into trying to imprint those things, and whenever someone else reads it, they get the sense of what you were feeling as you were writing it, which is kind of crazy how some of the stuff that I read, even comic books, I'm like, wow, like these guys really nailed it with this particular scene. Not only the art but the writing, like these two, the artist and the writer were so one with the same idea that they were able to deliver that message, and B, just the fact that that message was able to be delivered to me and I can understand what they were trying to say. There's nothing better than that. So even better whenever someone has a really active imagination and they're actually reading a real book, not a comic book, and they can have that connection with you of like, oh, he must have been feeling this during this time, or I wonder what he was feeling during this time. So it's definitely sounds like a really cool process. You mentioned, video games, and we're kind of getting to the end of the questions here. I didn't want to make this a super duper, exhausting interview or anything like that. But I feel like we've covered some good stuff here. I've read in your other interviews that music plays a huge part in each book. Kind of tone, thematically has a different theme, a different feel to it. And you will spend a good amount of time trying to build the soundtrack for your book. Can you kind of run me through the 3 tones and just like a handful of bands for each book that you were kind of listening to around that time? Because I myself, I'm the wannabe critic. That's what my YouTube channel is. That's a huge part of what I do is review music. So
Sure.
kind of walk me through that. Like what was for each 3 for all of the books, what were the themes and what artists and things that you decided to go with for each book?
So as you're talking, I'm actually bringing up my iTunes because I keep the playlist from books I've done in the past. It's a nice walk down memory lane to go look at the soundtrack.
Yeah, I do. Go ahead. Sorry, I was just gonna.
Well,
I didn't know if you needed time to kind of fill or whatever.
No, it's open, but go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I do something similar. Like I make a best of playlist each year, and I have them back all the way back to like 2016, which is
Nice.
really when I first started like thinking about being a wannabe critic of sorts, as so there's that. But if you got it, yeah, I'm very curious.
Cool. Well, the first thing I'll do is when I'm first starting on the concepts of the story and thinking about what's this going to be about, who's going to be in it, how's it going to feel. That's when I'll start essentially putting together the playlist, and I'll end up putting a lot of songs in there that don't end up going into the soundtrack. But in that stage, I'm just collecting things that I'm thinking, okay, that could possibly be in it. That could possibly go for this character, or like a scene where this kind of thing happens. And so that helps me actually in the early stages to flesh out the concept of the story, the tone of the story, and even certain character traits and things. And then as I'm outlining, and then as I'm finally writing, that big playlist gets whittled down to where I have, for a scene or something that I want to have a song, I've got that one scene and that one song. And so I end up, depending on the book, having anywhere from like 8 to 25 songs, depending on the book. So I had an overall series theme for the Year of Lightning. And it was a song from Doctor Who, actually. I don't know if you're a Doctor Who fan.
I'm not a Whovian. I know what Doctor Who is.
Okay.
But I'm not a Whovian.
Yeah.
So
well, there's Murray Gold was a very celebrated composer for Doctor Who, and he wrote a song that was sort of a theme for a series of episodes called Doomsday. That when I heard that song, I thought, that feels like it would fit in this world that I'm creating, and so for me, that was always like the theme for the whole series. So let me look through the playlist. So for the Year of Lightning, there's a song from the movie Hancock called Death and Transfiguration that plays into a huge scene towards the end of the book. There is, I end up having soundtracks in my soundtracks a lot, not always.
Sure,
but,
like Hans Zimmer and stuff like that. No, I listen to those for fun, for sure. So.
I have the Riders of Rohan from the Two Towers.
Oh, I love that song.
Probably my favorite one on this soundtrack is called The Orange Man. It's from Unbreakable. And then there's a song from Crazy Heart called The Weary Kind that is actually the theme for the last serious scene in that book. The next one, The Black Tempest. Doomsday, of course, is the first one. I have a few from X-Men First Class that are in there. I have one song from The Bourne Ultimatum, one called from Rogue Valley from the Secret Life of Walter Mitty soundtrack. Um, let me see. I've got music from K-Pax, from Hannah, which was a like a kind of a spy movie. Let me see. There is um, kind of a gothy rock band called In This Moment
I
that
know.
made a
Oh yeah, I know. It's shit with the blonde lead singer.
so Adrenalize is the kind of the song for like a really knockdown drag out fight that happens in this story. And there's stuff from The Village, there's stuff from Safety Not Guaranteed, another couple of songs from Doctor Who. And now for the Genesis Flame. Um, there's a big fight scene that I took the end credits from 300. Um, I have one song from the old series of unfortunate events. Thomas Newman was the
Composer.
composer there. A song called Freedom Fighters from Two Steps from Hell, which I love. I love Two Steps from Hell. Um, let me see. There's a song for Inception called Time. There's also a key song from Oblivion, the Tom Cruise movie.
Mm-hmm. Which M83
Um,
did that entire soundtrack, if I'm not mistaken.
yes, which I love M83. Um, and there's a song for another kind of a big scene from a group called the Cinematic Orchestra that I have for a big scene. And then 12 Titans also does sort of like Two Steps from Hell type music. And they did a song called Dark Halo that's in a big scene. So those type of songs, and I have lots of in between songs for quieter moments and things, but um,
Very big
big,
sounding, like
big sounding stuff. But then if it gives you a contrast, this book that I sold recently called Remember Me Archie, it's about a boy using storytelling to try to save his grandfather from Alzheimer's. Um, so while there are some big songs in that as well, just because there's some fantasy sequences, there's also stuff like from Broadchurch, which is definitely much quieter and a little more brooding. Um,
that's
there's
a show. Yeah, that's like a British crime show, right?
yeah, it's a British
Yeah,
mystery
my
show.
wife loved that show.
Yeah, there's one song from Serenity. There's another one from one of the versions of Peter Pan, like a movie that came out. There's a song from Elizabethtown. This is a middle grade book, so it's younger teenagers. So I have a couple songs from the Duff soundtrack. Um, so it's definitely
More delicate. Yeah,
definitely overall lighter and not
yeah,
as epic. Just because you're in most of the scenes, you're dealing with normal people that are dealing with regular stuff.
right. And that makes sense. How they say music affects our emotions. And
Absolutely.
it will have different. You can't say you'll listen to metal music and just be angry. That's not a thing. Like that's
Mhm.
that can happen for sure. But there's actually things that might be very calming to some people that actually really make me mad. And it's kind of crazy how music does that weird thing of it. It has different effects on everybody. And it's nice to see that you have kind of like a wide array of
Mhm.
and like a wide variety of music, and you can definitely tell you're a music fan. You're very learned in your musical repertoire of things that you like, because it is so varied. And even the more epic sounding stuff, like anything from the writers of Rohan, to M83 is like, that's a huge. Those are both epic moments, but those, to me, those are two very
And
different
oh yeah,
feelings of epic. So that's really cool. As I was reading through interviews, that was something, and we had talked about this before. How music had kind of affected you, and like how you kind of have like to have something on in the background while you're working on stuff, and there's a purpose to it, which was very
yeah.
fascinating to me. Um,
Yeah, there's always a purpose. And then I think one of the reasons, I know it is for me, I suspect it is for other writers. One of the reasons I think we end up using soundtracks a lot is because those songs are meant to help establish the mood and the rhythm of a scene, which is exactly what you're looking to do in a book. And I've had sometimes where I've made creative decisions about a scene because the song I'm listening to helps me steer it, in a way that's like, okay, here's a way to get the emotional effect that I'm going for.
Right. Yeah, and that makes perfect sense to me because I've done the exact same thing of listening to a song or listening to a soundtrack and formulating my own stories in my head of, oh, this would be perfect for this thing. Yeah, just this is crazy thing, but like even like Avatar. Do you ever watch Avatar: Last Airbender?
Oh man, I love that show.
So you know the first time Aang goes to the air temple and he realizes that he's the last one, and that music, that very delicate music, plays as he's flying away with kind of like the bells. Do you remember that at all by chance?
I would have to go listen to it.
You would be able. There's going to be people listening to this right now, and I think they actually play that throughout the entire series at different times. But ever since I was a little kid, I've only watched that episode a handful of times. But it's kind of crazy how that. Not only do I remember that music, but I remember that the things I was thinking about whenever I was a kid listening to that music and the stories I was building in my head or the scenes I was building in my head. And it just goes to show like how powerful, music can really be. And it sounds like like you said, you figure out a way how to take in things that mean something to you and steer your story and kind of your baby in a direction to where it can be successful or has the best chance of being successful. So
that's the goal. Yeah.
That is the goal. Well, Ryan, I feel like that's pretty much all I have, honestly, as far as question-wise go. I feel like that's a nice little, nice little bunch of questions, and I tried to be as different as I possibly could. With the what would you give me? I don't know, grade-wise, like a B plus.
A plus, man. This was great.
A plus. Thank you. Thank you. You didn't know I was going to put you on the spot, so you're just being nice. That's fine, but it's okay. So, kind of getting into just a brief little sidebar, is there any game you're playing right now or any game you're looking forward to? I mean, that's a big part of what we do here at the Wanna Be Critics. We talk about things. I mean, what are you playing right now?
So I have major game ADD. I almost never finish a game before I move on to other games. Mm-hmm. And then when I get kind of bored of that one, I'll move back to one I hadn't finished before. And so I'm always juggling a few different ones.
I can relate to that.
So I'm probably halfway through Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which was a lot of fun. And let me see the ones I'm playing now. I also found Anthem in like a bargain bin on a website, and I thought it's $5. I heard such terrible press about it, but I love like battle mechs, and it looked beautiful, so I thought I'll give it a shot. If I had paid full price, I would not have been happy, but for $5, I actually have a blast kind of running around in the battle suits and just shooting aliens and stuff. So that's pretty cool. I started just on a whim. I heard about this game that looked interesting to me, so I got it recently, called Control.
Oh yeah, and from Remedy.
Man, that is awesome.
Yeah.
I rarely have found a game that sets a mood and puts you in a place and has such strong and specific aesthetics and design that it is rare to find a game that commits like that and pulls it off so well. I'm at most, I think, maybe halfway through it, and I'm kind of slow playing it because I don't want to finish it too quickly.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed that. I got the Jedi game, Fallen Order. And I have a lot of problems with that game. I think they were trying to make a Dark Souls clone, which baffles me why they would try to make a Jedi game a Dark Souls clone, because it was so punishingly difficult. And I'm not an expert gamer, nor am I a novice gamer. I'm pretty decent. I'm pretty average.
Yeah.
So I can play any game you set in front of me on like the average rating, except for that game. It was so frustrating to the point I actually, and I never do this, but I actually tweeted at Respawn how much I hated it. I normally will keep that to myself because I think I don't want to put that kind of negativity out there, and I would rather but I was so disappointed because I have loved other work that Respawn has done.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see the story, and I saw the potential. I thought this could be so cool.
Yeah.
So finally what I did is I went back and I put it down, the difficulty down to their story level.
Yeah.
Which is basically it, which to me is the normal difficulty level on that game.
Yeah.
That plays like it's challenging but it's not frustrating.
Yeah.
And to me, it completely misses the point of what it should feel like to play as a Jedi. I mean, of course it should be challenging, but it should feel fun and rewarding and like an adventure. I don't know anyone who would go into a Jedi game wanting it to be frustrating and wanting it to feel like it's punishing you. And I just had
Yeah.
so many problems with thematically that they would think that that was the right decision. Um, it, I don't know. I had a real problem with that. Now, once I set it to a difficulty level to me that was reasonable,
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. But if I had tried working my way through the rest of the game on that level, I would have rage quit long before the end.
Yeah, and you're not the first person I've heard make that complaint. We're actually going to be covering that on Game Club, our other podcast or sister podcast, available on Spotify. And we're going to be doing kind of like a multi in-depth review, and I very much was in the middle. I'm kind of like you, I hop around, but I'm trying to do better about finishing my games and kind of getting into Jedi Fallen Order. I played the first 2 hours, and I was like, oh my god, this is gorgeous. The gameplay mechanic doesn't really bother me. I could definitely see why people would, and you're talking to someone who loved, the Star Wars Force Unleashed games, where it very much felt like you were OP, in a way. And I think what Respawn was trying to do was they're trying to give the audience a more grounded experience. As this, this kid, he's very much kind of coming into his own as a Jedi. He's learning the ropes, and I feel like there's an attention to detail that is definitely not for everybody whenever it comes to that game. And I haven't finished it. I'm going to, as I said before, we're playing it for review. But yeah, I could definitely see your frustrations. But kind of I'm looking to get toward the Tomb Raider games. I have those in my backlog.
They're fun. I really enjoyed them. I feel like the Uncharted games are stronger.
Yeah.
I feel like those are kind of like the ultimate realization of that kind of game.
Right. That's what I've heard.
But the Tomb Raider games are certainly a lot of fun. And
yeah, kind of like a filler,
playing them.
A little bit, like kind of like a filler between or a mix between something like what you might find in Uncharted and like maybe even Assassin's Creed, like a little bit of those mechanics kind of coming into play. And because I've played a little bit of them throughout the years, I just never finished any of them. It's funny you mentioned Control because I bought that day one and they were having some problems on PS4.
Really?
For the game, yeah, and my game kept crashing. So every time I would go turn it on, it would crash. So I was enjoying my time with it, not because I'm a huge Alan Wake fan, and I don't know if you ever played that, but
I'm familiar with it, but I never played it.
Yeah, so it's from the same developer who did Alan Wake, which Alan Wake was previously only available, or it's still only available on Xbox 360 and Xbox One, which I'm hoping for a PS4 port at some point. Do it, cowards. But yeah, no, Control, it definitely is something special. Another one it's been one of those things. I have next gens coming up. I have 4 podcasts, and I'm trying to do what I can to be as topical as I can while trying to enjoy myself. I'm gonna get to it at some point, but it's nice to hear that you're enjoying it and
very much.
Yeah.
The closest I could compare it to, and not even in like aesthetic or anything like that, but in depth as far as like how it immerses you in a tone. I haven't seen anything that strong probably since BioShock.
Okay. Yeah, and that's what I was getting too. Like that was, and see, BioShock's like one of my favorite games of all time. And there's nothing like going to that world for the first time.
And I loved playing that game because I literally just thought it looked interesting. I saw that it was pretty well rated, and I knew nothing else about it. And going in and experiencing that, and you feel like you're stepping into a Twilight Zone episode.
Yes.
in a way when you walk in, and there's such it's such a strong tone, and the aesthetic is so interesting that I found myself wishing that I had better ways to describe it, or that I had like the cinematic vocabulary that I could say, okay, they use this tone and they use this style for the building and this and that. I don't have the vocabulary for it.
Right.
I just am very impressed by it.
It has kind of like a noir feel to it, as far as like a very weird like bureau.
Yes,
like
that's a great word. Like you're stepping into a weird otherworldly government building.
Yeah,
that crazy stuff is happening, and there's that sort of. I mean, there's a little bit of like a bleak unreality to it, but it doesn't feel bleak. It's just very.
It's different.
Kind of claustrophobic.
Yeah, it's very. It kind of reminds me of, walking into the building for the first time, and I didn't know this was going to turn into a little mini review of Control, and that's fine. This podcast does what it needs to do. It reminded me of like walking into the building of The Matrix. Of
exactly,
where is everybody?
There's a scene where in The Matrix where Neo is getting lectured by his boss for being late, and there's a weird unreality to it, and like there's
Yes.
the guy like the window cleaners, and you can see on his face that he's like, this place is weird and it doesn't feel real, and
Yes.
this that is very much captured in this game. And I loved that. See, I like stuff like that that's can feel creepy, and you're not sure what's going to happen, but at the same time I have no stomach for gore. And so I love that it can be creepy and weird and kind of mind bendy, but there's not like blood and guts, and
Yeah.
it's
Very
it's
minimal. Very
yeah,
minimal
very
violence.
minimal. And so yeah, I'm really enjoying that. I only play it when I'm really in the mood for it, because I really
Yeah.
want to be able to get into it. So I'm slow playing it, but I'm always excited, whether it's a game or a book or a movie, when I just stumble onto something that ends up being so great.
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying, especially being in the right mood to play something like that. And it's to me, I'm playing the game and I'm like, man, I do not understand how this game got rated the way it did, as far as ESRB. And then I'm playing it, I'm like, this is just very unsettling. And
That's it. It's unsettling and creepy, and you don't really like. Well,
yeah,
like even something simple as there are those, like all the people in the offices that randomly they're just floating
floating. Yeah,
in the air in a very creepy setting, and they're not doing anything.
they're just
It's just
there.
they're just there floating on nothing, and it's just
It's
really
unsettling.
really weird. It's unsettling. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't want to, it's, I definitely understand the rating, but I myself, I'm playing through, I'm like, man, there's more violence here. There's less violence than what I would find in an Uncharted game, here.
Oh yeah.
There's less here,
Yeah.
there. And it's, I definitely, I'm eager, if my game will stay, will not crash, I'll be happy to finish it at some point. But it's nice to hear, last time I talked to you, you were like, oh man, I'm just so busy. I don't have time to play games. I haven't been able to really do anything. We had talked
Mhm.
about Destiny a little bit, which my Destiny interest kind of fell off with the newest update. I just, that man, it sucks because I might be done with that game for a while.
Destiny is a game that I always enjoy, but I just a lot of times I don't think to play it.
Yeah, I don't want to devote
So
my life to it, and it very much has turned into the thing of you have to play this every day.
I don't want anything that I'm going to have to grind anything for.
Yeah,
I just don't have the time for that. Even with Anthem, that's a game you could grind on, but it's also a game that I could jump on for an hour and just
yeah,
go fly around and get in battles and stuff,
yeah,
and that I find very satisfying. To me it feels like uh, um, Destiny. It feels like Destiny in a
yeah.
way like that,
Right.
but in a more accessible way.
Yeah, except you're
Uh,
basically playing as Iron Man.
exactly. Which
Who
who
wouldn't
wouldn't
want?
enjoy
Yeah,
that?
who wouldn't enjoy that? Yeah, it's I'm gonna be anxious to see the kind of like the revamp for Anthem that it is inevitable at some point. But I'm not going to devote any more time to that game anytime soon. Me and my friend game share, so I got it for free.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I was like, I jumped in, I was like, yeah, this is cool. Nothing grabbing me, to keep me
Sure.
involved. And it's one of those things. Like, I'm sure if I'd played a little bit longer, it might have, but it is what it is. But it's nice to hear that you got it for $5. That's awesome. Like,
Yeah, so I went in with zero
yeah,
expectations. Yeah, and it's like there's little enough time to devote to playing a game. Play the ones that really you enjoy.
yeah,
I've gotten more and more that way with books as well. If I'm 3 chapters into a book and I'm not enjoying it, I don't finish that book.
yep. And I try and buy stuff on sale as much as I can because it's like, should I not like this? Obviously there's the big blockbuster stuff that I'm going to play through, and that I will buy at full price to play day one. But a lot of times stuff that I've heard about, or it's like, I don't know if I'm 100% sold on this, I'll buy it on sale. And if I end up not finishing it, it's like, yeah, I wasted $20 or $15, I guess, technically, whatever. But, whatever type thing. It's just,
Sure.
enjoy what you want to enjoy. But it's nice to hear that you're taking some time to play some games and, that you're happy with, where you're at and you're always continuing to move forward and you're with your writing. And like I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and kind of talk about it a little bit. And
Yeah, man. Absolutely.
this is really cool for me to have an established author that I can call a friend as well, coming on the show. And you are obviously always welcome here. So
Hey, I appreciate it. Yeah, well, just let me know when you want to do it again.
yeah, for sure. Maybe we can get you to tag along on some other projects too, potentially.
Yeah, if you're doing reviews and other stuff of things I've like had some experience with, I'm happy to jump on when I can.
Yeah, totally. And my people will get in touch with your people.
Okay, cool.
Ladies and
Perfect.
gentlemen, thank you so much again, Ryan. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Wannabe Critic, your weekly stop for diversity. We definitely appreciate you guys tuning in. We appreciate all the feedback that we get whenever we do get it. I don't know if I've mentioned this in enough episodes. We do have several new podcast feeds, as I mentioned at the outset of the episode. You can find those on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as a handful of other sites. We use the hosting site for Anchor for those particular feeds. So if you want to check it out, if it's not on your podcast feed of choice, I'm sorry, but you might, if you're interested in checking it out, we are on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, which is pretty much, those are the big dogs at this point, for listening to podcasts. And we're just trying to kind of follow suit with where, the leaders are going. So, definitely check those out, give those a chance. The links to those will be in the description should you so desire and are interested to check them out. And we would appreciate you doing so. Thank you again for stopping by, Ryan. Thank you for giving me a chunk of your day, and thank you guys for preparing yourselves for a plethora of hot takes and potentially unpopular opinions. We will see you next time. Say goodbye, Ryan.
Goodbye, Ryan.